No one has ever collected a single DNA sample from the Sentinelese. They occupy roughly 60 square kilometers of reef-ringed forest in the Bay of Bengal, and every attempt to reach them across 2.5 centuries has ended in failure or death. Yet, genetics drawn from their closest living relatives carry lineages found nowhere else on Earth, maternal haplogroups that may trace back to the earliest human migration out of Africa, DNA that rewrites our model of human history. And it builds the strongest case for why no one should ever set foot on that island again. North Sentinel Island covers approximately 60 square kilometers in the Bay of Bengal. The landmass is mostly flat, with dense tropical forest stretching across its interior. The highest point rises just over 20 meters above sea level, according to Indian topographic surveys. The coastline runs for about 20 kilometers and is encircled by a continuous coral reef. This reef begins as a shallow platform, often less than 2 meters deep at low tide, then drops sharply to depths exceeding 30 meters beyond the outer slope. The reef forms a natural barrier, making boat landings nearly impossible except at a few narrow channels. At low tide, the lagoon between the reef and the shore exposes sandbars and submerged hazards. Hydrographic charts from the Indian Navy document unpredictable currents and shifting shoals around the island, especially during the monsoon. The reef's complexity has caused multiple shipwrecks, including the ship Nineveh in 1867 and smaller vessels in recent decades. The Indian government enforces a strict legal perimeter around North Sentinel. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands Regulation, enacted in 1956, prohibits any approach within a 5-kilometer radius of the island without written permission from the administrator. Section 5 of the regulation specifies this exclusion zone and authorizes penalties for violations, including fines and imprisonment. The regulation is reinforced by the Andaman and Nicobar Islands Regulation of Entry Rules, 1975, which delegate enforcement to the Directorate of Tribal Welfare. These rules are not symbolic. Patrol boats from the Indian Coast Guard and local police regularly monitor the surrounding waters. Satellite tracking and aerial surveys supplement maritime patrols to detect unauthorized approaches. The 5-kilometer buffer is maintained both to protect the Sentinelese and to prevent accidental landings by fishermen or tourists. The exclusion zone is grounded in public health and human rights concerns. Historical records from neighboring islands document catastrophic disease outbreaks following outside contact. The legal buffer is designed to prevent similar outcomes on North Sentinel. The law also reflects India's obligations under international agreements, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which affirms the right of communities to remain undisturbed. No exceptions are made for scientific research or humanitarian missions. The result is a physical and legal barrier that has remained intact for over 6 decades, making North Sentinel one of the most inaccessible inhabited places on Earth. The combination of hazardous reef, dense forest, and statutory exclusion has preserved the island's isolation as a matter of both geography and policy. Narrow outrigger canoes skim the shallow lagoon surrounding North Sentinel Island. Their hulls are carved from single logs, fitted with a bamboo float for stability, and steered by a single pole planted in the sand. These vessels allow the Sentinelese to move quickly across the reef, navigate tidal channels, and fish in waters off limits to deeper draft boats. Indian Coast Guard and Navy patrols have recorded these canoes from a distance since the 1970s, noting their shallow draft and efficient construction. No other Andamanese group uses this exact design. Iron salvage is a constant along the island's beaches. After shipwrecks, Sentinelese have been seen dragging rusted hull plates and metal debris ashore. Observers describe a process of cold working, breaking, bending, and grinding iron fragments using stone tools and fire. The result is a range of implements, arrowheads, knives, and small chisels shaped without smelting. Arrowheads made from salvaged iron were first reported by survivors of the Nineveh wreck in 1867, and later confirmed by aerial photography and Coast Guard reports. These points are attached to wooden shafts, fletched with palm leaves, and bound with plant fiber. Some arrows are barbed for fishing, others are designed for defense, with a distinct curve and a sharp, leaf-shaped blade. Sentinelese huts, visible from the air cluster just above the high tide line. They are built from palm thatch and driftwood, with open sides facing the beach. Cooking fires burn in the sand, and drying racks for fish and turtle meat are sometimes visible. No evidence of agriculture or animal husbandry has been observed, but the presence of nets, baskets, and woven mats indicates a broad toolkit. Reports from the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami provide a rare test of resilience. 3 days after the disaster, a Coast Guard helicopter flying low over the island recorded Sentinelese on the shore, retrieving driftwood and salvaged metal. Adults fired arrows at the aircraft while children played nearby. Huts had already been rebuilt, and no signs of injury or distress were visible. The tribe's rapid recovery, without outside assistance, was confirmed by multiple flyovers in the following weeks. Everything known about the Sentinelese comes from distant observation. Their technology and organization are not relics of a lost era, but practical adaptations to a challenging environment. The use of iron, the specialized canoe, and the swift response to disaster all point to a society that is both self-sufficient and inventive. These facts dismantle the stereotype of a Stone Age people and establish the Sentinelese as skilled survivors, maintaining autonomy through knowledge of their land and sea. The next chapter in their story begins with the first attempts by outsiders to break that isolation. In June 1771, the East India Company ship under John Ritchie logged fires flickering on the northern shore of an unnamed island in the Bay of Bengal. The crew watched from a distance, recording the beacons, but making no attempt to land. This brief entry marks the first European sighting of North Sentinel Island, a place that would soon become notorious for its hostility to outsiders. Nearly a century later, on April 14, 1867, the merchant vessel Nineveh ran aground on the island's coral reef. 86 survivors waited anxiously on the beach, only to be confronted by islanders armed with bows and iron-tipped arrows. The crew was forced back to their longboat under threat, escaping with their lives. This encounter set a precedent. The Sentinelese met strangers with force, making clear their intent to remain isolated. In November 1880, British officer Maurice Vidal Portman led an armed party from the Andaman penal settlement onto North Sentinel. Portman's own journals describe how his group captured an elderly couple and 4 children, taking them to Port Blair. The adults died within days, likely from diseases brought by the British. The children, after 2 weeks under observation, were returned to the island with gifts of iron tools and cloth. Portman noted that his party faced arrows on arrival, and the islanders quickly withdrew into the forest. The expedition lasted 3 days before the British retreated, shaken by the consequences of their intrusion. On February 3, 1896, an escaped convict from Port Blair drifted to North Sentinel on a makeshift raft. Days later, his body was discovered on the beach, pierced by arrows. The British coroner's inquest in Calcutta attributed his death to violent resistance by the islanders. This would be the last officially recorded fatal encounter during the colonial era. Portman's diaries and judicial records reveal a pattern. Every attempt at contact led to violence or tragedy. Disease transmission, as seen in the deaths of the elderly captives, was a recurring outcome of colonial incursions across the Andaman Islands. Epidemics of measles, influenza, and cholera devastated indigenous populations. The great Andamanese, once numbering in the thousands, dwindled to just 52 individuals by 2010. No direct genetic sampling has ever been conducted on the Sentinelese. Studies of neighboring groups, Onge, Jarawa, and Great Andamanese, show mitochondrial haplogroups M31 and M32, unique to these islands, and Y chromosome haplogroup D, rare elsewhere in Asia. Whole genome sequencing of Onge and Jarawa individuals in 2016 revealed traces of an extinct hominin, supporting the idea of an early migration out of Africa. The Indian government's 1956 Protection of Aboriginal Tribes regulation now forbids any approach within 5 kilometers of North Sentinel. Aerial surveys confirm the continued presence and apparent health of the island's inhabitants. The policy of enforced isolation stands as a response to the long history of violence and loss. On November 15, 2018, John Allen Chau, an American missionary, paid local fishermen to take him near North Sentinel Island. He carried a waterproof Bible and gifts, including scissors and safety pins. The fishermen stopped outside the 5-kilometer exclusion zone. Chau paddled alone toward the shore in a kayak, violating Indian law that prohibits all unauthorized contact with the Sentinelese. According to police reports and court filings, Chau made multiple attempts to land over the next 2 days. The fishermen later testified that the Sentinelese fired arrows and forced him back into the water. On November 17th, Chau tried again. Witnesses described seeing Sentinelese men shoot arrows as he approached. He was last seen face down in the surf. The fishermen reported that his body was dragged inland and buried on the beach. Indian authorities launched an investigation, arresting the fishermen who had assisted Chau and charging them under the Andaman and Nicobar Islands regulation. The government reaffirmed the ban on contact, citing both public health risks and the tribe's right to remain undisturbed. The case drew international attention. Media coverage debated the ethics of missionary activity and the dangers of disease transmission. Medical experts warned that any outside presence could introduce pathogens lethal to a population with no immunity to common illnesses. The Sentinelese response, defensive, immediate, and fatal, matched a pattern seen in every prior encounter with outsiders. The aftermath of Chau's death prompted Indian officials to tighten enforcement around North Sentinel. Coast Guard patrols increased along the exclusion perimeter. New guidelines required tourism operators and local fishermen to report any approach to protected islands. The Ministry of Home Affairs issued a statement confirming that no exceptions would be made for humanitarian, scientific, or religious missions. International organizations, including Survival International and the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, cited the incident as evidence for strict non-contact policies. The legal and ethical consensus held: the Sentinelese must be left alone, both to protect their health and to respect their autonomy under Indian and international law. Chau's death stands as the most recent and public example of the risks posed by intrusion. It also underscores the limits of what can be known about the Sentinelese. Direct study, whether for religious, scientific, or humanitarian reasons, remains off limits. The only responsible approach is distant observation and indirect inference. This principle shapes the next chapter. Understanding what the Sentinelese may represent, not through direct contact, but by examining the genetics of their neighbors. No direct DNA samples have ever been collected from the Sentinelese. Indian law and international ethics protocols prohibit any attempt at genetic research involving this group. All genetic insights about North Sentinel Island rely on data from neighboring populations, the Onge, Jarwa, and Great Andamanese. These datasets were assembled with informed consent under Indian institutional review, beginning in 2003 for mitochondrial DNA and continuing through 2016 with whole genome sequencing. Sample sizes range from 14 Great Andamanese to 30 Onge and 27 Jarwa in the earliest studies, with later projects sequencing up to 21 high-coverage genomes. Researchers use these neighboring groups as proxies, modeling the likely genetic makeup of the Sentinelese based on shared ancestry and geographic proximity. This proxy approach is standard in cases where direct sampling is impossible or unethical. Advanced statistical methods, such as admixture graphs and Bayesian computation, allow scientists to estimate divergence times, migration rates, and ancestral components without direct Sentinelese data. All findings about North Sentinel Island genetics are inferences drawn from these proxy datasets, not from any direct measurement. In 2003, geneticist Kumarasamy Thangaraj and colleagues published the first comprehensive mitochondrial DNA analysis of the Andamanese. The study sampled 30 Onge, 27 Jarawa, and 14 Great Andamanese, focusing on the maternal line. Researchers identified two deep-rooted haplogroups, M31 and M32, present at high frequency across all three groups. These lineages are absent in mainland South Asia and have not been detected in any other global population. Coalescence dating placed their origin over 50,000 years ago, indicating uninterrupted maternal descent since the initial peopling of the islands. The persistence of M31 and M32, even after centuries of demographic collapse among the Great Andamanese and Onge, points to profound genetic isolation. No direct mitochondrial DNA has ever been collected from the Sentinelese, but the presence of these unique haplogroups in all neighboring groups suggests a shared ancestry that diverged early from other human populations. This maternal signature positions the Andamanese on a distinct branch of the human family tree, supporting the model of an ancient southern migration out of Africa. High-coverage genome sequencing of the Onge and Jarwa, published by the Mondal team in 2016, detected an archaic admixture signal of approximately 2 to 3%. This DNA does not match Neanderthal or Denisovan references, indicating ancestry from an unknown hominin lineage. The F statistics analysis produced a Z-score above 3, meeting the threshold for statistical significance. These findings are drawn entirely from neighboring groups. No direct Sentinelese DNA has ever been analyzed. The physical traits of the Andamanese, such as dark skin and short stature, reflect convergent evolution, not recent African ancestry. Indian law prohibits any genetic or biomedical sampling of the Sentinelese under the 1956 Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Regulation. Section 5 of this statute forbids approach or research without explicit government permission. This legal shield is reinforced by international protocols, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The rationale is empirical. Epidemic death rates among the Great Andamanese, Onge, and Jarawa following colonial contact reached 30 to 50% within a generation. The risk of introducing new pathogens remains acute. The same evidence that makes the Sentinelese scientifically valuable also justifies a strict non-contact policy. Science and ethics converge. The only responsible course is to protect the island's isolation. No living person has seen a Sentinelese genome. Every inference comes from neighboring Andamanese, never from the island itself. Today, international law prohibits all contact, protecting the Sentinelese from pathogens and exploitation. As extinction erases unique human lineages worldwide, their isolation preserves an unbroken ancestry. The real test is whether our curiosity can respect boundaries. Sometimes, the greatest lesson is knowing when to leave a question unanswered.